There is a place where the human body reaches its absolute limit, where every breath becomes a battle, every step a negotiation with death. These are not fictional landscapes from science fiction films. They are real places on this planet, and real people have not only entered them but walked out alive. The stories of those who have survived Earth's most hostile environments are not simply tales of luck. They are testaments to something far deeper, the extraordinary resilience woven into the fabric of human biology and psychology. From the frozen wastelands of Antarctica to the scorching heart of the Sahara Desert, from the crushing depths of the ocean to the thin, oxygen-starved air above 8,000 meters, survival in these places demands everything a person has, and then some. What makes these stories so compelling is not just the physical ordeal, it is the mental architecture that survivors build in real time, the decisions made under pressure, the will to push forward when every instinct screams to stop. Scientists who study extreme survival have found that the human body is far more adaptable than most people realize. Core temperature can drop several degrees before the brain shuts down completely. The body can go weeks without food, days without water under certain conditions. And the mind, when properly focused, can override signals of pain and exhaustion in ways that seem almost supernatural. These are not superhuman individuals. They are ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances, and their stories reveal something profound about what it means to be alive. In 1994, a Moroccan ultramarathon known as the Marathon des Sables, which translates to Marathon of the Sands, witnessed one of the most remarkable survival stories ever recorded in athletic history. Mauro Prosperi, an Italian police officer and athlete, became separated from the race route during a violent sandstorm. When the storm cleared, he found himself completely alone in the Algerian desert, with no landmarks, no fellow runners, and rapidly dwindling supplies. For 9 days, he wandered through one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. He drank his own urine. He ate bats and snakes raw. He attempted to take his own life at one point, only to find that his blood had become so dehydrated and thick that the wound clotted almost immediately. He eventually stumbled upon a nomadic family who saved his life. By the time he was found, he had lost over 16 kilograms and had wandered approximately 300 kilometers off course. What kept him alive was not just physical toughness, it was a mental shift, a decision made consciously in the desert heat, to keep moving, to keep finding reasons to survive. Prosperi later said that thoughts of his family became his anchor. The desert, in all its brutal indifference, could not sever that connection. His story illustrates a principle that survival experts return to again and again. The will to live is not passive. It is an active, deliberate choice made moment by moment. If the desert represents one extreme of Earth's hostility, Antarctica represents another. The coldest, windiest, and driest continent on the planet, Antarctica is a place where exposed skin freezes in minutes, and temperatures can plunge below -60 degrees Celsius. In 1914, Ernest Shackleton led an expedition that became one of the greatest survival stories in human history. His ship, the Endurance, became trapped in pack ice and was eventually crushed, leaving his crew of 27 men stranded on the frozen sea. What followed was nearly 2 years of survival against impossible odds. Shackleton made decisions that defied conventional logic. He prioritized morale alongside physical survival, understanding intuitively what modern psychology would later confirm, that group cohesion and mental health are as critical to survival as food and warmth. He organized entertainment, maintained routines, and ensured that every man felt valued. Not a single life was lost. The crew eventually reached safety after an 800-mile open-sea voyage in a small lifeboat, one of the most daring maritime journeys ever undertaken. The Shackleton story endures not just as a tale of physical endurance, but as a masterclass in leadership under pressure. It demonstrates that survival is rarely a solo endeavor. The bonds formed between people, the trust built in darkness and cold, can become as life-sustaining as any physical resource. High-altitude mountaineering sits in a category of its own when it comes to hostile environments. Above 8,000 meters in what climbers call the death zone, the human body begins to deteriorate rapidly. Oxygen levels are so low that the brain starts making errors in judgment, muscles break down faster than they can recover, and the risk of pulmonary and cerebral edema, dangerous fluid accumulation in the lungs and brain, becomes very real. In 1996, a catastrophic storm on Mount Everest killed 8 climbers in a single day, an event later chronicled in Jon Krakauer's book Into Thin Air. But within that tragedy were extraordinary stories of survival. Beck Weathers, a Texas pathologist, was left for dead on the mountain not once, but twice. He had lost his vision due to the effects of altitude and was found lying unconscious in the snow, his right hand frozen solid. Rescue teams deemed him beyond saving. Yet Weathers regained consciousness, stood up, and walked into camp on his own, a feat that his doctors later described as physiologically almost impossible. He lost his nose, his right hand, and the fingers of his left hand to frostbite, but he survived. His account speaks to a phenomenon that researchers call the survival arousal response, a last resort neurological event where the body floods itself with adrenaline and other hormones in a final attempt to preserve life. The mountain, indifferent and ancient, had done its worst. The human body in its final reserves had answered back. The ocean covers more than 70% of Earth's surface, and much of it remains more hostile to human life than the surface of Mars. In 2012, a Filipino sailor named Deo Picaña survived for 28 days adrift in the Pacific Ocean after the fishing vessel he worked on sank during a storm. He clung to a floating cooler, rationed whatever rainwater he could collect, and ate raw fish he managed to catch with his bare hands. He drifted through shark-infested waters, endured relentless sun exposure, and battled the psychological terror of complete isolation. When he was finally rescued by a passing cargo ship, he was severely dehydrated and malnourished but alive. His survival hinged on practical ingenuity, the ability to problem-solve under extreme duress, combined with an unshakable refusal to accept death as inevitable. Ocean survival stories share a common thread. The survivors almost universally describe a moment of clarity, a point at which they made a conscious decision to treat survival as their full-time occupation. Every waking moment became organized around that single goal. This kind of purposeful focus, researchers suggest, activates parts of the prefrontal cortex associated with planning and decision-making, effectively suppressing the panic response that can be fatal in survival situations. Across all of these stories, the desert wanderer, the icebound crew, the mountaineer left for dead, the sailor adrift at sea, certain patterns emerge with striking consistency. Survivors tend to remain calm under pressure, not because they feel no fear, but because they channel fear into action rather than paralysis. They break overwhelming situations into smaller, manageable problems. They find meaning in family, in faith, in sheer stubbornness that gives them a reason to endure. They adapt, they improvise, and perhaps most importantly, they refuse to accept the narrative that their situation is hopeless. The science of survival psychology has grown significantly in recent decades, and researchers like John Leach, who developed the concept of the survival mindset, have found that approximately 10 to 15% of people in life-threatening situations perform optimally, while the majority freeze or make poor decisions. The difference more often than not comes down to mental preparation and the ability to maintain what Leach calls the will to live as an active cognitive state. Earth's hostile environments are not going anywhere. The deserts will keep burning, the mountains will keep rising into oxygen-thin skies, and the oceans will keep swallowing ships. But these stories remind us that the human spirit, stubborn, adaptive, and fiercely alive, has proven itself capable of meeting those environments on their own terms. Survival is not just about the body. It is about the story we tell ourselves when everything else has been stripped away.